Alright everyone, it's time to keep going, and we're going to begin by looking at the where clause of the SQL query side of things. As we discussed earlier, we retrieve data from databases using the SQL select from where clause, and we've done some work with queries, but none of them have involved where at all. So I don't have that document anymore, unfortunately. Let's see. But I can pull it up again real quick. Blank document. And recall that we said select was what fields. We've already learned that. From is what tables. We've already worked with that. And the where is what conditions, or more specifically, which data. As opposed to all of it, which specific bits of data am I looking for. And it's not the same thing as select. Select says, I want these fields out of the results. Where says, I want the data that applies to this specific set. Select from payroll where employee ID equals 1. So whereas normally you would have to comb through all of payroll was the example I gave earlier. So now we're going to begin working with where, and this is found on page 41 of your textbook. So close that. And we're going to begin by looking at SKU data. And as you can see here, we've got some items. The SKU is unique, the description is unique, but the department and the buyer are not. So let's say we wanted to get the items that applied specifically for water sports. Well, what we've learned is, and we'll use the select star for simplicity's sake, but we can do select star from SKU data. That's what we've learned. But that gives us everything. What if we wanted to limit it to just the water sports stuff? We don't care about this camping or climbing business. We just want water sports. Well, that's what we use the where clause for, is to limit the data we get back. So we do where, and then we specify a condition. Now, for those of you who may have experience working in programming, a condition is where you get to determine a specific if this equals that, if this is greater than this. That's a condition. So I can say if variable 1 equals my string, then perform some code. And those of you who are used to working in programming may be familiar with this particular kind of syntax. And this is the condition side of things, where you compare two values together, and based on what you get, it performs something. So knowing that this is a condition, we can use this sort of thing for SQL queries. So where we're looking at a specific table and we want the water sports information, well, we know that's our department field, right? So we want the records where the department is water sports. So we do where, and department is what we're comparing it to. And we can do equals. Now I use the double equals in my example because that's how I think that's C# is composed. But this in SQL it's just done with a single equal sign. And you can say water sports like this, but this isn't correct. Whenever it's a string, and by a string we mean a series of text, characters, numbers, whatever, you have to put them in single quotes, or an apostrophe rather. So on one side and the other. So that way it knows this is a string, a single string, water space sports. So where the department is equal to water space sports, that's the data I want. So let's give that a try. Where department equals water sports. Now some of you may have noticed, wait, weren't you just talking about that apostrophe thing? Yes, it's important. At the beginning and the end, single quote for any string. What I mean by string is as opposed to a number. Some fields are designed to hold numbers specifically and only numbers. They can't hold letters, they can't hold special characters, just numbers. So we'll get more into that later, but you can tell the difference if you actually right click and go into design view for a table. It actually shows you what the data type is, and you can see this is a number and this is text. So if you're pulling against a number, you don't use the apostrophe. If you're pulling against text, you do. You'll get more practice with this. So if it sounds confusing now, I understand. We'll get more practice. You can go back over this as we get into that. So close that. I've got my where department equals water sports. Since it's a string, I've got it in the apostrophe, the single quotation mark. And we'll run it. Let's see what happens. Well, that's interesting. That's only half of the SKU data table as it was originally. But that's what we asked it for. You notice the original table, as I'm looking at here, has camping and climbing stuff in it, but it's nowhere in the results that we got back from our query, because I specifically asked it for data where the department was water sports. So it excluded this other stuff that I didn't ask for. I used the where clause to limit the data I got back. Now I'll give you an example of the single quote number thing. So let's say I wanted to find out, I've got this item 100, 100, but I don't know what it is. Well, I can tell what it is because I'm looking at the data here, but in a theoretical case, I've got an item number, I don't know what it is. Well, I could do, just as I did here, select star from SKU data where, and this is another condition, SKU, because that's what I'm looking for. I know what the SKU is, I want to find out what everything else is. Where SKU is equal to 100, 100. Now I didn't use the single quotes this time because my SKU is a number. When you're running a condition against a number, you don't use the single quotes. I know it sounds confusing, but trust me, we're going to get a lot more practice with this, and this is going to be something that I hit on very frequently. So it's important that you remember this. It's odd. How about I spell correctly? There we go. Strings you use the single quotes, numbers you don't. So here's your example. This was the example we were working at earlier. And for number, where we know that the text field is a number, these are great examples of the difference between numbers and strings. And usually you can tell that in the data because the field contains some kind of text in it, as opposed to just numbers. So, back to our example. Select star from SKU data where SKU is 100, 100. Rerun it. Open exclusively by another. Oh, you guys may run into this on occasion. If you have a table open in design view, you can't run queries against it. You have to close it. And then you can run your query. So it gave me just the record for that one item. And I know what it is now. And I know who it's for, and I know what department it's for. So we go back to our SQL view, and if I wanted to know what items were for my climbing department, it's very easy to find that out now. Where department equals climbing. And again, it's a string, so single quotes on both ends. And those are my two items for climbing. One other aside I want to make clear is that I don't use the quotes for the field name. I'm comparing this field to a specific string. So this is not correct because now it's actually going to compare the string skew description to half-dome intent, which is never true because those strings are not the same. If you leave it out, it thinks you're talking about the field. So that's important. So that is it for conditions. And come back later, we'll keep working with this.